The water looked harmless that morning. From the bluff above Tunnel's Beach on Kauai's north shore, the ocean spread out in clean blue lines, sunlight catching on the surface as the sets rolled in. 13-year-old Bethany Hamilton lay flat on her board just beyond the break, the nose pointed toward the horizon, her eyes fixed on the next swell. It was Halloween morning in 2003. The air was warm, the trade winds were low. She could hear the chatter of her best friend, Alana Blanchard, nearby, the splash of paddles, and the distant sound of waves breaking on the reef. It felt like any other surf session, quiet, familiar, and safe enough that she let herself relax, one arm draped casually in the water beside her board. Bethany had grown up in these waves. Her parents had moved to Kauai partly for the surf, and the ocean had been her playground since she was a toddler. By 13, she wasn't just a local kid who surfed. She was a rising competitive surfer with sponsors, trophies, and a reputation for fearlessly dropping into waves bigger than most adults would touch. Her board felt like an extension of her body. The reef, the lineup, the channels, they were as familiar as her own backyard. That comfort, that sense of belonging in the water, was what made what happened next so shocking. Out in the lineup that morning were Bethany, Alana, Alana's father Holt, and Alana's brother Byron. They had paddled out just after sunrise to avoid crowds. The first hour slid by in a rhythm of paddling, sitting, catching waves, and talking. At one point, the waves lulled, and Bethany drifted a bit outside the main pack, resting on her board, left arm dangling in the water, right hand gripping the rail near the nose. She stared toward the horizon, waiting for the next set. Under the surface, something large moved in silence. There was no fin slicing the water, no warning swirl. 1 second her hand was in the ocean, the next, the water exploded. A massive force slammed into her left side, jolting the board. Bethany saw a flash of gray and white, the wide head of a tiger shark rising out of the water as its jaws clamped down around her arm and the edge of the board. The bite was so powerful, it lifted her partially off the deck. For an instant, everything slowed. She felt the pressure, heard the crunch, saw the teeth. Then the shark wrenched once and was gone. The attack lasted less than a second, but the damage was total. The shark had taken her left arm just below the shoulder. Bethany's board snapped where the teeth had cut through the foam. She didn't scream. Later she would say there wasn't time. She looked down and saw only a raw, bleeding stump where her arm had been. Bright red blood poured into the water, swirling around her board and spreading out in a thin cloud. She was still conscious. Training and instinct kicked in. She rolled onto her board, clamping her right hand over what was left of her arm, and turned toward shore. Alana, only a few yards away, saw the flash and heard the impact. At first, she thought Bethany was joking when she said she'd been bitten. Then she saw the blood. Holt and Byron realized almost immediately that something catastrophic had happened. Holt paddled hard toward Bethany, grabbed the back of her board, and began towing her toward the beach. Alana and Byron flanked them on either side, watching the water for any sign the shark might return. The paddle in felt impossibly long. Every second counted. Bethany had lost a huge amount of blood in an instant, and the wound was still pumping. On the shore, other surfers and beachgoers saw them coming in fast and realized something was wrong. When Holt reached the sand, he and another bystander carried Bethany up the beach and laid her on the ground. Someone used the surf leash to create a tourniquet high on her shoulder, tightening it to slow the bleeding. Others called 911. Bethany remained conscious, shock setting in but her voice calm enough to answer questions. She told them she was thirsty, that she wanted to live, that she trusted God. While they waited for the ambulance, the tourniquet and firm pressure on the wound were the only things keeping her alive. The ambulance crew rushed her to Wilcox Memorial Hospital in Lihue. Doctors and nurses met her in the emergency bay, stunned by the severity of the injury and the fact that she was still conscious. She had lost roughly 60% of her blood. Her vital signs were dangerously low. Surgeons moved quickly, stabilizing her, cleaning the wound, and closing what remained of the shoulder. There was no arm to reattach. The focus was survival. Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, and keep her body from shutting down under the strain. Word of the attack spread across Kauai before Bethany even left surgery. In a tight-knit island community where surfers were like extended family, the news hit hard. Shark attacks were rare, and one this serious, involving a well-known teenage surfer, shook people. Reporters gathered outside the hospital. Friends and church members filled the waiting areas. Her parents, Tom and Sherry, had to process the shock of almost losing their daughter and the reality that even if she survived, her life as a surfer might be over. Bethany woke up in the hospital missing an arm. Her life changed in a way most 13-year-olds can't imagine. The pain was intense, but so were the questions. Could she still surf? Would she compete again? What would everyday tasks look like now? Getting dressed, cutting food, paddling a board. Doctors and physical therapists explained her limitations, the need for adaptation, and the long road ahead. But even in those early days, people around her noticed something steady in her response. She didn't deny what had happened. She didn't pretend it wasn't devastating, but she refused to let it be the end of her story. The investigation into the attack identified the shark as a 14-foot tiger shark, one of the apex predators of Hawaiian waters. Fishermen later caught a large tiger shark nearby with a piece of surfboard in its mouth that matched Bethany's board, strongly suggesting it was the same animal. For scientists, it was another data point in shark behavior. For Bethany, it was just confirmation of what she already knew. She had been hit by something massive and powerful that could have easily taken her life. Recovery moved in stages. First came wounds healing, regaining strength, and learning how to balance again. Then came practical adjustments, how to do everyday things with one hand, how to manage tasks that most people never think twice about. Her family turned their home into a kind of training ground. They helped her experiment with ways to stabilize objects, use her feet, or reposition her body to make up for the missing limb. Every task presented a new problem, and every problem demanded persistence. But the ocean kept calling. Less than a month after the attack, Bethany was back on a surfboard. Her father had helped modify a board with a handle carved into the deck to give her better leverage while paddling. The first paddle out was tentative, testing how to move with one arm, how to push herself up to her feet. It was frustrating, it was exhausting, but it was also proof that the thing she loved most wasn't gone. She could still feel the wave lift her, still feel the board plane across the water, still sense the rhythm she'd known her whole life. Over time, she adapted her technique. With only one arm, paddling required angled strokes and strategic positioning to catch waves early. Popping up demanded a shift in weight and explosive leg power. She had to relearn balance, foot placement, and timing. Few people expected her to return to serious competition. But Bethany didn't want sympathy. She wanted a jersey back on, a contest horn, and a lineup full of other surfers who weren't going to go easy on her. Within a year, she was not just back in local contests, but placing well. In 2005, she won the Explorer Women's Division at the NSSA National Championships, a major milestone for any young surfer, let alone one who had lost an arm 2 years earlier. Sponsors who had stuck by her saw that she wasn't a charity story. She was an athlete with the drive and talent to compete at a high level. The media attention followed, bringing her story to audiences far beyond the surf world. The years after the attack turned Bethany into something she never set out to be, a symbol of resilience. She traveled, gave talks, wrote about her experience, and shared her faith openly. People who had never stood on a surfboard related to the core of her story, losing something vital, then choosing not to let that loss define the rest of their life. She went on to surf in major events, marry, and become a mother, continuing to chase heavy waves at a level many able-bodied surfers never reach. What happened off Tunnel's beach that October morning could have ended in silence. A young life cut short, a promising career erased, another name added to a list of shark attack victims. Instead, it became the beginning of a different kind of story. The ocean that nearly killed her remained the place she returned to, again and again, not as someone reckless or unaware of the danger, but as someone who had faced it, survived, and chosen to keep living in the space that once held her biggest fear. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.